Please be aware, in this podcast series we talk about all areas of safeguarding, which some people may find upsetting. So please make sure you're okay listening to today's topic. Be mindful of those around you, such as children, that you might not want to listen in. Hi, I'm SSS Safeguarding Director Sam Preston.
And I'm former head teacher and content author Sara Spinks.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Safeguarding Conversations. If you work in a school, college or any education setting, you'll probably already know that one of the most anticipated documents each year is Keeping Children Safe in Education, or KCSIE as we call it. And this year's edition certainly gives us plenty to talk about. KCSIE 2026 isn't simply a few wording changes this year or a handful of updated references. There are some significant developments that every education setting needs to understand before the new academic year begins.
Absolutely. So every year we hear people ask, how much has changed? Well, this year, the answer is definitely yes, much has changed. While some amendments, they clarify existing expectations, there's also several important additions that will affect the safeguarding practice, staff training, policies, and leadership responsibilities.
That's right. So let's get started, Sarah, with the bigger picture. KCSIE has always been about creating a culture where safeguarding is everyone's responsibility, and that hasn't changed. But what has changed is the breadth of topics covered and the expectations placed on schools and colleges to respond to the emerging risks.
Yeah, one of the biggest developments this year is the expanded role of designated safeguarding leads and deputy leads, known as deputy DSLs.
Yeah.
So the guidance provides greater clarity about their responsibilities, recognising the increasingly complex nature of safeguarding. So for many schools, that may mean reviewing workloads, training arrangements, and ensuring sufficient capacity within safeguarding teams.
And that's a really important point. Safeguarding, it's evolved enormously over the last decade. Today's DSL isn't simply responding to child protection referrals. They're coordinating early help, managing increasingly complex safeguarding concerns and working across multiple agencies and supporting staff every single day.
Absolutely. Alongside these changes, the guidance also strengthens several safeguarding themes that have become increasingly important. There's updated content on serious violence, mental health, modern slavery, safer recruitment, and the growing use of artificial intelligence, or AI, in education.
And the inclusion of AI is particularly timely. Schools are increasingly using artificial intelligence in teaching, administration, and even safeguarding processes. In KCSIE, it recognises both the opportunities and the potential risks, reminding schools that safeguarding principles must apply regardless of how technology evolves.
And I think it's worth remembering that AI isn't just something schools use. Children and young people are also using it. And that, I think, creates new considerations around online safety, misinformation, inappropriate content, deepfakes, privacy, and how pupils interact with emerging technologies. So staff need to understand those risks if they're going to safeguard children effectively.
That's right. And actually, I think it was either the end of last week or this week, the Internet Watch Foundation has just produced new guidance on children using chatbots as friends. It is a rapidly expanding area that we really need to keep up with. I will just mention we're launching our new course, which focuses on AI and safeguarding, and that will be available in September. So moving on, mental health also continues to feature prominently. KCSIE reinforces that staff are not expected to diagnose mental health conditions, but they should recognise when mental health concerns may become safeguarding concerns and know how to respond appropriately.
That's the message we often reinforce in our training, isn't it, Sam? Teachers
Yeah.
don't need to become mental health professionals, but they do need to recognise changes in behaviour, understand when concerns should be shared, and know how to access the right support through their safeguarding procedures.
Yeah, absolutely. Another area receiving additional attention is serious violence, and schools are being encouraged to, remain professionally curious, recognise the indicators that children may be at risk, and work proactively with partner agencies where concerns arise.
And we also see continuing strengthening of guidance around modern slavery and exploitation. As our understanding of child exploitation evolves, so does the statutory guidance. So schools are increasingly expected to recognise that exploitation can take many different forms and may not always be immediately obvious.
I think as well, just reflecting on you saying that, Sarah, I think we've still got some way to go for people automatically kind of making that link that exploitation can actually be modern slavery. I don't quite think that sort of automatic consideration is there yet. I think it's still kind of seen as two independent things. So I think, and there's definitely work to do around that. But, this year's KCSIE is very, very clear. Recruitment, that's also seen important updates in this version. Safer recruitment remains one of the cornerstones of effective safeguarding, and it's vital that leaders understand any changes affecting pre-employment checks, ongoing vigilance, and maintaining a safer workforce.
And of course, it's not just the safeguarding team who needs to understand these changes. KCSIE makes it clear that safeguarding is everyone's responsibility.
Yeah.
Every member of staff needs to know what has changed and how it affects their day-to-day practice.
And that's expanding through to, obviously we've seen the changes around employment checks for volunteers, etc. So, really, you do need to be absolutely on top of this, but also, as you say, everybody needs to understand what level people are actually, so that I suppose they're able to, if things change during an activity, you don't want to be in a position where you are moving somebody from non-regulated into regulated activity. One of the things you need to be able to do is consider whether you can do that if they've been checked to the appropriate levels. So that's, I suppose, an example of why it's important that everybody at least has that on their radar. And it's why annual safeguarding updates are so important. Reading the guidance is one thing, but understanding what those changes mean in practice is something else entirely.
Exactly. Staff often tell us they appreciate practical examples because they help translate statutory guidance into real life situations that they'll encounter in school. And that's what effective safeguarding training does do. It should build confidence, not simply tick a compliance box.
Absolutely. And it's worth saying that KCSIE isn't just aimed at teachers. We've got governors, trustees, senior leaders, support staff, volunteers, anyone working with children, all have a role to play in creating a strong safeguarding culture.
So I think the key message is that safeguarding never stands still. Every year we learn more about the risks children face, the statutory guidance evolves to reflect that. Schools that take time to understand the changes, review their procedures and invest in high quality staff training, I think will be in a much stronger position to keep children safe.
Absolutely. And if you're wondering how you're going to find time to work through all of the changes, that's exactly why we've developed our KCSIE 2026 update courses. The courses, one for staff and one for governance, SLT, DSLs and their deputies, they've been specifically designed for schools, colleges and other education settings. We explain every significant change, we explore what it means in practice and provide practical examples to help leaders, governors, trustees and DSLs and all members of staff understand their responsibilities under the latest statutory guidance. It isn't simply a summary of the document. We need to explain the reasons behind the changes, highlight the practical implications, and help education settings prepare confidently for the new academic year.
Yeah, and the course also sits alongside our wider safeguarding and compliance training programme, giving
Yeah.
schools access to comprehensive professional development throughout the year rather than just an annual update.
Absolutely. So if you want to ensure your staff are fully informed, your policies reflect the latest statutory guidance. And I would just remind that, Suite customers have access to our full policy library, and getting your your setting ready for September, I'd encourage you to take a look at our KCSIE 2026 courses.
And don't forget the new AI course.
Yes, of course, we will have the new AI course. That will, as I said, that will be available in September. I'm actually just working on final content for the production at the moment. We also have an extra podcast this week, which we're releasing before the end of term. There's a real difference in dates for schools breaking up this year. So we wanted to make sure we released this one a week early to make sure that everybody could access them for those schools that are breaking up a little bit early and are anxious to have fun on holiday. So the additional podcast that's going to be on spare adrenaline auto injectors in schools. Now, I really would recommend you give this a good listen because there's been a lot of confusion. I've spoken with a lot of schools over the last few days about this. There's been a lot of confusion interpreting what the guidance actually means practically for schools. And it's not just a case of you need to have pens in schools. There's a lot more to it. So please do give that a listen because it's a super podcast. And I think you'll find it really, really helpful. And remember, all of that needs to be in place for September, because at the moment the guidance is saying that schools are expected to have the pens in place for September. We may very, very well have the statutory law passed by then, which will make it a mandatory requirement. So please do have a listen to that if you have time. So all that's left to say today is thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.